Thank you, Paul. Thank you very much for coming out this evening. It's lovely to be here. Thank you for the invitation to come and speak to you. As Paul says, the subject this evening is the Bible and your brain. It's all in your mind. I don't know if you've really stopped and thought about this, but between your ears and in your skull is the most complex structure in the whole of the universe. There is nothing more complicated in the whole of the universe than what is in your head, which is, of course, your brain, which is, in effect, your mind. And just literally a couple of weeks ago, in The Independent, this was back on the 2nd of April, was this headline: "The human brain is the most complex structure in the universe. Let's do all we can to unravel its mysteries." The human brain, it says, has been called the most complex object in the known universe, and in many ways the final frontier of science. 100 billion neurons, close to a quadrillion connections between them, and we don't even fully understand a single cell. So you might say, well, how on earth are we supposed to do this subject this evening where there's just this complexity? Well, there is enormous complexity. However, as we're going to see in a minute, the Bible's got a lot to say about the mind, and there's quite a bit that we need to have a look at, I think, to try and understand this amazing thing, because it's the one thing that sets us apart from everything else that God has made. The brain is just that incredible. So we're going to have a think about the mind, but I wanted to just begin just by explaining to you how this sort of subject came about. And it came about like this. So around about 18 months ago, the company that I work for, it's a fairly big company, and it has a sort of a national conference every year. And at this national conference, they sort of spend some cash and bring in so-called celebrity people, most of which I've never heard of in my life. And anyway, this, about 18 months ago, this was the chap that appeared on the stage. Now, does anybody know who that is? Angie does. Who's that? It's Chris Hoy, or to give him his full title, Sir Chris Hoy. And as he came in, everybody gave him a standing ovation, not at the end of his speech, but at the very beginning, because this guy's done some pretty incredible things. In fact, he is Britain's greatest Olympian from a cycling point. Well, he's actually Britain's greatest Olympian ever. Out of all sports, he's won more Olympic gold medals than anybody. He's a cyclist. And he came along to do this speech. It's a really interesting sort of speech. I was expecting him to sort of explain, you know, how he won all these gold medals. And he did actually explain, but not in the way that I thought he was going to explain. I thought he was going to talk about his diet and his training and his commitment and his coach and all of those sorts of things. And he did mention those. But the thing that he mentioned most of all was not those things. He said, actually, if you want to win a gold medal, it comes down to hundredths of a second sometimes. It's absolutely... And actually, it isn't any longer about the training that you've done. It's about your mind. And the mind can slow you down. If you've got the slightest bit of doubt creeping in, then actually it will affect fundamentally your performance more than all the training. It's not saying you can become an Olympian without doing the training, but he was saying the crucial bit if you want to win is controlling your mind. And he went on to talk about the person who had helped him control his mind. And he talked about a man called Dr. Stephen Peters. And he said, basically, he taught me to control my chimp. And he says, I'm not going to really talk anymore about this, he said, because it's going to sound pretty weird. But he did taught me to control my mind. And that was the end of his speech. And to be perfectly honest with you, I wouldn't have thought any more about it. But during this period of time, about 18 months ago, the company I worked for was buying another company. And they did buy this other company. It was another very large company. And they also have a national conference. And so 4 weeks after this conference, I ended up in Newcastle at another company's conference, but because we'd bought them in the meantime. So anyway, I go along to that conference, and guess who was speaking at this conference? It wasn't Sir Chris Hoy. It was Dr. Stephen Peters. And I thought to myself, wait a minute, that's who Chris Hoy was talking about. And there's a picture of Dr. Stephen Peters down there. And basically what Dr. Stephen Peters did for around about 45 minutes was explain your mind and how it works, and explain something about the chimp that people have in their brains and how it works and how you can control it. And to be honest with you, the thing that suddenly got me, and hopefully you'll see this in a minute, is that when he was talking, it was almost as if he was quoting Bible passages. He isn't a Christian as I understand it, but it was almost like he was quoting from the Bible when he was explaining how your mind actually works. And I was so intrigued by what he was saying. And by the way, this chap, Dr. Stephen Peters, has worked not only with Chris Hoy, but quite a number of other Olympians, all of who have exceeded and succeeded in whatever sport that they were doing. And it was all to do with being able to control the brain and control your mind. And the book that he actually wrote is this book here. It's called The Chimp Paradox. This mind management sort of system, the mind program that helped me win my Olympic gold medals, Sir Chris Hoy has got on the front cover of the book. Now you might be sat there thinking, wait a minute, the chimp paradox in your brain, is this some sort of evolutionary sort of idea? And it isn't. It's nothing whatsoever to do with evolution. Dr. Stephen Peters is not saying you have got some, you've evolved from some monkey. You'll see exactly what's going on in your brain in just a minute. But it's the most amazing thing. And I believe, I'm going to show you, that it links directly back. What they've discovered as to how your mind actually works links 100% back into the Bible. Now you might actually say, well, why do we need to think about any other book apart from the Bible? Why do we need to read some book by this Dr. Stephen Peters at all? But in my thinking, it's a bit like this. You can read Genesis chapter 1 and read that God created the heavens and the earth, and somebody might do some fantastic research into how the eye works or how the stars are made or such like. And actually looking at those things can actually increase your faith in what God has actually written in his word. And therefore, to me, this is a little bit like that. This is an expert in how the mind works. And wonderfully and remarkably, it links directly back to scriptures. That's what we're going to have a look at in just a second. The Bible has a lot to do with your brain, doesn't it, when you stop and think about it? The Bible's very interested about your mind. If it is the most complex thing in all the universe, God has put that together. And it's no surprise that in the scriptures he mentions in his word a lot to do with your mind. And we could put up thousands of passages that talk about imagination, that talk about thinking, that talk about understanding, that talk about wisdom. I'm just going to put up not thousands, probably 3 or 4, just to make the point. So in Genesis chapter 6, we read that God saw that the wickedness of man was great in the earth. And now have a look what he says. The imagination of the thoughts of his heart were only evil continually. In other words, the minds of the people had become corrupted back then, in the time of Noah, which led to the violence and the corruption that we read about in those early chapters of Genesis. But it's the thoughts of his heart and the imaginations that he was having that was causing that to happen. We've just read these verses, haven't we? Finally, brethren, says Paul, whatsoever things are true, whatsoever things are honest, whatever is just, pure, lovely, of good report, if there's any virtue, what have we got to do? Think on these things. Use your brain. Fill it with the right stuff. Don't fill it with the bad stuff. Because that affects, whatever's going on up here will affect what you physically do, won't it? We see it. That was that horrible incident years ago with I think, was it Jamie Bolger or somebody like that? Those little kids had watched a horror film and then they copied it exactly by killing another young child. And God says you've got to fill your mind with these things. We think about the parable of the sower. And of course, this one, of course, is all about what's going on in your brain. The word of God, which is being scattered as seed, where's that actually falling? It's falling in people's minds. It's affecting the way that they think. And Jesus actually says and explains his parable of the sower by saying, he that receives seed into the good ground is he that hears the word and understands it. In other words, it's gone into his mind. It's affected the way he's thinking. And actually that word understandeth in the Greek literally means to be worked out logically in the brain. This isn't some emotional thing. This is literally sitting down and working it through and coming to a logical conclusion that this is true. And so we could go on. The Bible's very, very interested in your mind and what you're doing with it. So, back to this book here, the Chimp Paradox. I was so impressed by what Dr. Stephen Peters had said that on the train back from Newcastle, because that's where this conference actually was, on my iPad I managed to download this book, which I've now bought, the hard copy of it, so I can literally feel like I'm properly reading it. So anyway, I downloaded it on the train. It takes 4.5 hours on the train from Newcastle back home, and in that time I'd probably read a third of it. And to be honest with you, it's totally changed my life, the way I think, the way I operate. It is the most amazing thing. Because it talks about how the brain works and has helped me personally to understand quite a number of things. I gave this talk only once before, and there was a lady in the audience who'd been in a severe car crash that had affected her brain severely by damaging the frontal lobe. And for 8 years she'd had treatment. And at the end of the talk, which I'm hoping you might get something out of, she said out of 8 years of seeing psychologists, brain surgeons, you name it, she's seen them, nothing has helped to understand more about what's actually going on in her mind than this. Now, maybe that was a one-off, I don't know, but let's see how we get on. So this isn't just about this book, I'm just going to show you a few things about it. So first of all, it begins by talking about the psychological mind. And the first thing he says is, this is a very simplified version of your brain. You can split it up into very small parts, but he says fundamentally there are 7 brains working together in somebody's mind, which are all detailed out there. But he goes on and says, I'm going to simplify those 7 brains even more. I'm going to simplify it down, and we're literally going to talk about the parietal part of your brain here, the frontal part of your brain here, and the limbic part of your brain here. Now, what do those names mean? What's parietal? What's frontal? What's limbic? He says, what I'm going to do is convert these sort of terms that don't mean anything to anybody into symbolic pictures to help you understand what they do. Very simplified, but I'm going to convert them, he says, into something even more simplified. And this is how he simplifies it in the book. Right? So he simplifies it. He says the limbic part of the mind, I'm going to tell you that is like having a chimp in your brain. I'm going to explain what it does, how it works, and how you control it. Nothing to do with evolution, but it's a good symbol from his point of view to explain how that part of the brain works. The front part of your brain, the frontal lobe, he says think of that as almost like your human part of your brain. Animals really don't have this frontal part at all. They've got very, very small underdeveloped frontal lobes. They're tiny little bits here that really don't do anything. With a human, it's the most fully developed part. And he says this is really what makes us human, is this part here. And I'll explain to you what that part does in just a moment. And the other part, the parietal bit up here, he says we're going to think of that like a computer. Right, so that was him simplifying it all down. So what makes up a human, in simple terms, is something that acts like a chimp, something that acts like a human, something that acts like a computer. So now he says, let me explain to you how these things work. Now, hopefully, for those of you, I think all of us in here who are used to coming along and listening to Bible talks, will straight away perhaps start thinking about scriptural passages when we read this bit, because he now introduces the chimp. He says when you were in the womb, two different brains, the frontal part, as he's sort of symbolically calling the human part, and the limbic part, the bit that he calls the chimp, which we're going to explain in a minute exactly what that is, developed independently and then introduced themselves to each other by forming connections. The problem is that they found that they were not in agreement about most things. Either of these two brains or beings could run your life for you, but they try to work together for you, but they try to work together, and therein is the problem. The human and the chimp have independent personalities with different agendas, ways of thinking and modes of operating. Effectively, he says there are two beings in your head. He says that the chimp is an emotional machine that thinks independently from us. It's not good or bad, he says, it's just a chimp. He went on and said there's actually a war that goes on in people's minds. But it's because, and actually he says, a lot of people don't realise this, that there are effectively two beings in your head. There are literally two beings in your head that are fighting against each other. There's a war that goes on, and the idea is how do you overcome the war that's going on between these two parts of your mind? What happens is both of them can think, and both of them can react to different events. And I'm going to show you how that actually sort of happens. He says quite an interesting thing. He says, how can it be that sometimes you don't have control over what thoughts or emotions you have and what behaviours you carry out? He asked this audience of 1,000 people, does anybody have in here unwarranted thoughts? Thoughts that you think, why am I thinking that? What a stupid thing to think. Have any of you done that? You think, what a silly thing to think. Could be something crazy like throwing yourself under a bus or harming yourself. Or there's all sorts of crazy things that occasionally can come into your mind. He says, does that ever happen? I think for some of us it can happen. Do you ever have emotions? You think, why do I feel like that? And perhaps later you think, well, why did I react like that? What a silly thing I've just done. And why did I do that? That isn't me. I haven't reacted like I would want to react. He said, sometimes you can be two very different people and at different times react in very different ways. He said something quite interesting in the book. If you become emotional, irrational, especially when angry or distressed, he said the blood supply is going to the chimp, to the limbic part of your brain. And consequently, it's the chimp at that point that's running the show. So he says, let me explain to you why I'm calling it a chimp, nothing to do with evolution, why I'm calling it a chimp, what is this chimp all about? So remember he said that we were born with this. Every single person was born with a functioning chimp. Straight away, the chimp is functioning. Now, the purpose and agenda of the limbic part of the brain, of this chimp part of the brain, is fundamentally to do with survival. He says this is where your sex drive is, where your desire for food, for shelter, powerful drives, emotions, all of that type of thing is built within the chimp. All designed and all put there. And the reason, obviously, he's calling it a chimp is because many of these things are what we might call animal instincts. Animals have exactly the same sort of thing, haven't they? Inbuilt into them, the desire for food, for sex, for survival, for shelter. That's what animals are driven by. And he said human beings have got exactly that same part in them, and that is a separate, identifiable part in your mind. The chimp, he says, runs on emotion. It's on feelings. The chimp doesn't think logically about things. It doesn't reason through things. There's very little logic involved with the chimp. And it often thinks catastrophically, and it thinks in black and white terms. So it's feelings, it's emotion, and this is all generated in this part of your mind. Now, obviously, the chimp is needed for survival. If actually there was no chimp in anybody's mind, then the survival instincts, the desires, we might even say some of the lusts that are there, if they were all taken away, the survival of the human species is in doubt. These things are required, he says, and are needed, but, and this is a really key point, he says owning a chimp is like owning a dog. You're not responsible for the nature of your chimp, he says, but you are responsible for managing it and keeping it well behaved. That's exactly what he quotes in the book. So he said, different people's chimps have got different sort of feelings. They react differently to different things. Somebody can have a weakness over here to do with food. Somebody can have a weakness over here to do with sex. A weakness. And everybody's chimp, they pretty much have got common denominators, as you can imagine. But he says you are not responsible for the nature of the chimp that you had. It was all pre-wired and pre-programmed into your brain as you were being born. But he says, even though you're not responsible for the nature of your chimp, you are absolutely responsible for managing it and keeping it well behaved. Just as a dog, if it goes off the leash and bites somebody, is the owner responsible? Answer, yes. This is how we would like the chimp behaving, nice and sensibly, not like that. Okay? We don't want a crazy chimp. Now, you might say, well, is the chimp bad? Has God given us this part of the brain with natural instincts as something bad? So what do you think to that? Has God given us something bad in our minds? Well, of course he hasn't. God is the one who's created all these neurons, that has created the brain in all these different amazing ways. And God saw, when he made Adam, that everything that he had made was very good. So the part of the brain that operates like a chimp in itself is not bad. And that's exactly what Dr. Stephen Peters says. It's not in essence bad, but you've got to manage it, you've got to control it. God has given every human being a chimp to deal with. Every one of us has got a chimp in our mind. See, God knows that we need emotion, he knows we need instinct, he knows we need certain things built within us that, motivate us, regardless of how we might think, to do certain things. Survival instincts, you might say. A lot of it is there within the chimp. But we've got to manage it. We'll look at that in just a minute. Now, what about the human then? This front part, which is unique in human beings. This frontal lobe. So now this is quite interesting. The front part of your brain is basically the bit that makes us human. All other animals have got their own natural instincts, just like we have, and there it finishes. The one difference with the species of human is the frontal lobe of the brain. And this is really the truly thinking part of the brain, the bit that sits down and works things out. He says it's this part of the brain, he says the purpose and agenda of the human, the front part of the brain, is self-fulfillment and the search for the meaning of life. That's what it actually is there for, and that's what we use it for, to search for the meaning of life. It's where we would look for the purpose in life. It's to do with ethical principles, logical thinking, it's rational, it puts things in perspective, it's got understanding. He says that is what the front part of your brain is doing. It's thinking logically, trying to find the truth. He keeps talking about the truth. In his book, it mentions, I don't know how many times, the front part is trying to find the truth. You can block it out. Some people become quite like a chimp. And actually, it's all about their emotions and feeding their lusts, and they forget about the human part of the brain. And in fact, what do they become like? Become like animals, don't they? Probably people say worse than animals. But the frontal part of your brain, that's what it's designed for. That's what we're engaging when we are thinking about the things that we're going to think about. It's the front part of the brain that asks these questions. The chimp really never asks these questions. It never says who, what, where, when, or why. That isn't your chimp doing that. That's the front human part of your brain. Again, a quote from the book. Humans begin to work out what is happening by first establishing the fact. When he says humans, he's talking about the front part of your brain. Humans begin to work out what's happening by first establishing the facts. They gather all the information available before beginning to make plans. Having gathered the facts, humans try to establish the truth and then base their beliefs on the truth. Ring any bells? Use your front part of the brain to logically look through something, and your beliefs are then based on truth. The chimp doesn't do that. Now, and these are all pictures taken from the book, right? So he says something happens. Could be anything. Both parts of your brain instantly are going to try and deal with this. But he says, do you know something? It always goes to the chimp first. If something happens, it's always the chimp that gets it first. If the chimp isn't too bothered about it, or is a nice calm chimp, it says, I'm asleep, I'm not really bothered about that, and it will go straight into the human, and the human then thinks logically, works things through, and will decide. So let me give you an example. Somebody cuts you up in the car. Okay? That event will instantly go to the chimp. There's nothing you can do to stop it going to the chimp, he says. It's straight there. Now, if your chimp is not under control, if you've got a pretty crazy chimp, one that gets angry, emotional, and reacts, instantly, it will never get to this chap for a while. It will instantly now be with the chimp. And the chimp now is reacting. And the chimp thinks, I'm going to crash my car, and I'm going to get out with my baseball bat. I'm going to go crazy. And we see that happen, don't we? It's people whose chimps are completely out of control. It's about emotional. There's no logic to it, is there? No logic whatsoever. This is all emotion. It's all feeling. And I'll put a plan of action in place. If your chimp is under control, it misses him out entirely and goes straight into the human that thinks logically about this and says to yourself, well, look, he's a bit of a crazy fool. He's cut me up. It isn't going to change my life. I still need to get to work. And you think it through. He says, here's what happens, though. The guy whose chimp is out of control, the chimp will react. But later, the chimp goes back to sleep. The human kicks in. And the very same person who went crazy quite often will then think logically about what he's done. And think, what have I done? What a fool I've been. Isn't that interesting? We have to control the chimp. So there we are. Goes the chimp first, the human second. The human and the chimp both think in the here and now and both interpret situations as they happen, and they are operating differently. The human interprets things in a calm and logical manner. The chimp interprets things in an emotional manner. The chimp and the human can work effectively together. The chimp, with its instincts and drives, can keep us safe and healthy. You know, you don't want to logically think, now, what's going on here? There's a car racing towards me. What shall I do? No, that's when you need a chimp. The chimp will react instantly and fast and swerve you out the way and save you. You have to have a chimp. We can't take the power off the chimp. Why can't we take the power off the chimp and make decisions? The simple answer is that the chimp is more powerful and acts more quickly than the human. A real chimp has 5 times the strength of a human. In the same way, you can think of your emotional inner chimp as having 5 times your strength. And really, this book is all about how you control the chimp. And he says, don't get into an arm wrestle with your chimp, because your human's going to lose. You've got to be very tactful as to how you calm your chimp down and how you treat it. And that's really what he introduced into these Olympic sports people, of how you control the chimp. He says, and this was lifted from the book, he says, a golden rule is this: whenever you have feelings, thoughts or behaviours that you do not want, that you do not welcome, then you're being hijacked by your chimp. Interesting, isn't it? The chimp, a separate part of your brain, has hijacked you. So there's chimp, I think emotionally, with feelings and impressions. The human part, I think logically and work with facts and with truth. Now you might say, well, hold on a minute. We've talked about the chimp and the human. What's this third bit? What's this computer bit all about? What's going on there? Well, let me quickly explain about this computer. Now, when you're born, this computer is completely empty. I mean, there's nothing in it whatsoever. The chimp has got all hardwired to do things. This is completely empty. The computer, he says, is this, and this is the parietal part of your brain at the top. He says it's the reference source for information, beliefs and values. It's not just about what I've learned from a book, though that's part of it. It's all about experience as well. So any experiences get logged on the computer. Anything you've learned gets logged on the computer. And interestingly, the chimp and the human both reference the computer. So, as it says there, when you were born, the computer was an empty hard drive. It's potentially, he says in the book, more powerful than the chimp and the human, because it's the reference source that both of them look to for help and guidance. So if you've filled your computer with rubbish, the chimp and the human will go and access rubbish. So it's really important to put into the computer the right things as reference, because otherwise they're both going to get it wrong. Now, I thought I'd just have a look here about both the chimp and the human, and show you a bad chimp, and I'm going to show you a bad human. I'm talking about parts of the brain here, yeah? So let me show you what a bad chimp looks like. So this is somebody whose chimp is way out of control. This is a crazy chimp. This is somebody that's lost all control. This is a chimp with natural instincts out of control. Somebody that's over drinking. Somebody that's sexually immoral, that's sleeping around. Somebody that's involved in gangs. That's another part of chimp behaviour. Greed, lust, rage, jealousy, revenge, all these things is an out-of-control chimp. There is no control of urges that were put there legitimately by God, and animal instincts are ruling that person. The chimp is just ruling the person. Remember that picture of the dog taking the human for a walk? That's what's going on here. And we see it, don't we, with, especially with young people, but even more so in the world that we see, more and more people with chimps out of control. But do you know something? The human bit can get out of control as well. See, the human bit is logical thinking. It's about working things out. But let me show you an out-of-control human. It's basically a proud human. It's somebody that's looking at education and scientific understanding and ever learning, but never really able to appreciate and understand that God is here and I am here. My learning and this, I've used the frontal part of my brain to such an extent that I don't need God anymore. I'm a proud, sort of puffed up human. I don't know if he is proud or puffed up human, but he looked like one to me. It's probably somebody we know. It's somebody that's not recognising their God and Creator. Somebody that's got no faith. Somebody that says, I'm in effect like a God. I'm so clever. I'm so intelligent. I know things. And God might have said he made the world in 6 days. But to be fair, I know better. This is a human that's gone wrong. So the chimp that can go wrong and the human can go wrong. Let me show you what a chimp and a human that are working right look like. So we've still got a chimp, but the chimp is controlled. So there isn't adultery, there's a man living with one woman, they're eating and drinking in moderation, they've got love and compassion and forgiveness, and all those attributes are within inside the chimp. Their feelings are under control, their animal instincts are not ruling them, they're sat down looking something like that. And somebody pointed out there's bananas on the table there, so that was, I didn't mean to do that. And on the other side, the human part is humble. So even though it's got this learning and logic, it says, well, actually, I'm trying to think, not like me, but like God. I'm trying to recognise him as a creator. I'm basing my faith on evidence and logic and truth. And I'm also recognising at the same time my weakness as a human being and that God is here and I am just rotting flesh and I'm dust and that's where I'm going to return. And it's somebody that is a repentant, humble person. That's the human working well. And those two working together like that is really how it should be. The computer, of course, also can be right and wrong. So we can have a computer with gremlins in. He actually talks in exactly this way. You can have a computer with gremlins, as he calls them. We might say a virus. And this is, if you remember, the computer was what you're putting into your brain as reference points. So, if we fill our minds with TV, with worldly wisdom, with worldly films and worldly books, if we're starting reading the God delusion and the theory of evolution, then basically what's going to happen? Our mind itself is getting corrupted on that part because the reference point now has gone wrong. We're going to reference the wrong things. A computer that is good would be one that is filled with godly thinking. And there's only really one book, as we know, that's going to teach us the right way, and that is the Bible. Titus chapter 2 verse 11 and 12 says, it teaches us to say no to ungodliness and worldly passions and to live self-controlled, upright and godly lives. Isn't that precisely what the Bible does? It says no to that. My reference point says no, I'm not going to do that. Even though my chimp might say, this is a great idea. Let's get drunk, take drugs, have a party. No. Reference guide says no. So how does all this fit in with the Bible? Well, of course, the Bible says repeatedly that there is a battle in the mind. Paul says, the good I want to do, quite often I don't do it. And the evil things that I really don't want to do, well, gosh, I keep doing those things. Can you feel the battle? He says there's a war going on. Romans 7 verse 24 says, in my mind I really want to obey God's law, but because of my sinful nature, I'm a slave to sin. And unfortunately, the sinful nature is very much summed up with the chimp out of control. But also, of course, the human getting too proud. 1 Peter 2 verse 11 says, dearly beloved, I beseech you as strangers and pilgrims, abstain from fleshly lusts which war against the soul. A battle. See, he says there's a battle going on. There's a war going on between fleshly lusts. What's that? The chimp. Which war against the soul, which is talking about your life and the things that you are doing. There's a war going on. James 4 verse 1, what causes fights and quarrels among you? Don't they come from your desires, chimp, that battle within you? The chimp is forever out of, well, not forever out of control. We can control it, but it never quite goes away. And so coming back to this, in the book it said, if you're at the very beginning, it says effectively there are two beings in your head and there's a war that's going on between them. Precisely what the Bible says. And this bit was new to me because I'd always thought that I've got one mind that just reacts differently at different times. The new bit to me and the bit I hadn't understood was there are two separate beings in your brain that are doing this. And God has given us both. The Bible tells us a lot about what a bad chimp is looking like. These are the works of the flesh. Now, does this sound like a chimp out of control to you? Somebody that's committing adultery, fornication, uncleanliness, lasciviousness, idolatry, witchcraft, which is drug taking, hatred, variance, emulations, wraths, seditions, heresies, envyings, murders, drunkenness, revellings, and the like. Is that a description of an out of control chimp? Sounds like it to me. Let me show you a bad human. Now I'm putting up actual faces here, right? But it doesn't have to be just those three guys. But look, these people, in my mind, are people who have become bad humans. They've gone out of control with their human part and become very proud. This know also, says Paul to Timothy, that in the last days perilous times will come. Men are going to love themselves. They're going to be ever learning and never able to come to the knowledge of the truth. These also resist the truth. Men of corrupt minds, reprobate concerning the faith. They've all got puffed up. They've got a proud human. Their chimp might be very well under control. I'm sure, these sorts of people were not going partying and on booze cruises and going crazy, though they might be, I don't know. But their problem is their human part. And it's just as bad as the other part. Now, the Bible says what the root causes of sin actually are. In 1 John 2, verse 16, it says, all that's in the world are three things. This is talking about sin and the problem of sin. He basically says it's the lust of the flesh, the lust of the eyes, and the pride of life. Now, just stop a minute. It says all sin, in effect, comes from those three things. Lust of the flesh, lust of the eyes, pride of life. Now, the lust of the flesh, this is to do with, I've put there, sex drive, food, drink, satisfying flesh. Okay? Now, to me, that is talking about the chimp being out of control. The lust of the eyes is looking at something saying, I want that. And looking at something else and saying, I really want that as well. It's greed and wanting more. And I think pretty much that is also the chimp. The pride of life, though, is where we've got knowledge and intelligence and I'm feeling pretty puffed up. And I think that is the human part. And all of those things are not of the Father if they're out of control, but of the world. And the answer, of course, fundamentally comes down to the reference guide. We've got to get the computer bit right, because if the computer bit's corrupt, the chimp's going to go corrupt, and so is the human. Psalm 119, verse 105 says, thy word is a lamp to my feet and a light to my path. So if we've programmed with God's word, the reference point for both the chimp and the human is going to be correct. Nehemiah 8 verse 8 says, they read from the book of the law of God and clearly explained the meaning of what was being read, helping the people understand each passage. See, they're now programming their brains with the word of God. So before I act, let me first check with the computer. That's what the human and the chimp are saying. Let me go and just check what I've programmed in the computer. They both do that and look at that before acting. Now, interestingly, of course, we're in a world right now where actually we see stuff like this on the side of buses. Now, have a look at this. They did not think, this is Romans 1 verse 28, they did not think it worthwhile to retain the knowledge of God. So God gave them over to a depraved mind, so that they do what ought not to be done. They've become filled with every kind of wickedness, evil, greed and depravity. They're full of envy, murder, strife, deceit and malice. They are gossips, slanderers, God-haters, insolent, arrogant and boastful. They invent ways of doing evil. They disobey their parents. They've no understanding, no fidelity, no love and no mercy. We're basically being told here that ultimately, if you're going to not program the computer in the right way, God will actually say, fine, off you go then. And what's left but all of these things? Proud human, out of control chimp. I don't know if you've ever considered this before, but all of this suddenly came into my mind while I was thinking about this further, and I don't know why I'd never thought about it before. You see, a godly mind is actually the greatest commandment of all. Because Jesus actually said, when he was asked, what's the greatest commandment? He actually says, thou shalt love the Lord thy God with all thy heart, and with all thy soul, and with all thy mind. And I suddenly stopped and thought, what is it when it talks about the heart? How do you love something? The heart is just it's just a pump. What is it? How do I love something with a pump? It's nothing more than a pump. There's no brain in the heart. How and why are we talking about a heart? And when you look it up, the word heart in the Greek is this word here, cardia, and it actually says in Strong's, it's the mind, but it's the emotional and feeling part of your mind. Well, well, well. God actually has picked on a word there that's picking out the limbic part of the brain. And instead of saying, well, it's the limbic part of your brain that you're loving me with, or the chimp, he says, well, we'll call it your heart. We'll call it your heart because your heart beats and you feel it beating faster and slower. You can feel there's emotion somehow connected with your heart. But actually, it isn't the pump, it's the mind, but it's the emotional feeling part. So what God is saying, what Jesus is saying, love your God with your chimp. The chimp in your brain shouldn't be off doing what it wants. It should love God with all its being. And he then says, the other word is mind, and that word is the Greek word dianonia, or something like that. Somebody will pronounce that much better than me, probably Steve. And this is, again, the word mind, but it says in Strong's this is to do with understanding. Now, wait a moment. Understanding, logical thinking, there's your human. The very words were describing the two bits in our minds that only now, in recent years, we can see that there are these two bits in our mind. And the soul actually is the word for life. It's how we're living. So we're doing it with our emotions and feelings, our chimp, with our understanding, our human, but also in the way we act and live. All parts, therefore, are covered, and it's all loving God. And so to sort of summarise, and I'm very nearly finished, you'll be glad to know, here's animal instincts. Controlled equals good. Uncontrolled equals bad. We cannot fully control because our chimps keep getting out of control. But the Bible calls this flesh. Another word for the chimp is flesh. It's or human instinct. And most temptations are generated in here. Sex, lust, greed, all are being generated in here. It's out of control. So flesh, human instinct, sinful flesh, that's all being generated out here. But on the other side, we've got emotions and feelings. Controlled are good, uncontrolled are bad. And again, we don't fully control these properly. The Bible calls this the heart. The heart can love, which is good, and the heart can be hard, which is bad. On the human side of things, we've got reasoning and thinking. Only human beings think. No animal on the planet sits down and thinks, what am I going to have for breakfast today? They don't think. And therefore, only this can ever know God. Only that can truly know God. And the Bible calls that spirit. So there's flesh, fleshly thinking. This is godly thinking here now. Godly wisdom and reasoning is good. Worldly wisdom and reasoning is bad. Quite often, we'll do something wrong here because of this, and this bit would justify logically why that wasn't wrong. Ever done that? I think we do. And finally, the reference library is the computer here. Both the chimp and the human refer to it. If programmed with the Bible, it's good. If programmed with man's ideas, it is bad. 3 key points I just wanted to show you here. Evil thoughts, you know, themselves are not sin. Did you know that? Having an evil thought is not sin. If that was so, Jesus sinned. Because Jesus thought about doing things that were wrong. Evil thoughts are not themselves sin. If those thoughts become action, it is sin. Uncontrolled evil thoughts lead to sin. And we read that because it says every man is tempted when he's drawn away of his own lust and enticed. This is the chimp now getting out of control. When the lust is conceived, it brings forth sin. And when sin is finished, it brings forth death. And the last 3 slides I wanted to just show you were these. Because do you realise Jesus had a chimp? He had a chimp, and we're going to have a quick look at it. Jesus was in all points tempted like as we are, yet he didn't sin. He had a chimp, he had a human, and he had a computer. He was made exactly like the rest of us. But do you know something? He controlled his chimp. So when he was in the wilderness, it says the tempter came to Jesus and said, "If thou be the Son of God, command that these stones be made bread." Now, which part of his brain, because this isn't an outside person talking to Jesus, this is his mind. Which part of his mind, do you think, was thinking, "Oh, I'm a bit hungry, I've got this amazing power. I'm going to turn a bit of rock into a nice loaf, bit of a bloomer. I might eat that in the wilderness." What part of his brain was thinking that? It's his chimp. But what did he go and do? He says, better go to the reference library. Now, what have I learned in that? And he answered it with the reference library. Went straight to Deuteronomy, answered it, boxed his chimp right down, stopped. How brilliant is that? Controlled it. And so also we could say the chimp in the scriptures is also called the devil. Because we read it's the devil that was doing this. It's another symbolic term. Just as Dr. Stephen Peters has invented a chimp to help explain it, God's created a symbolic devil to help us understand this. They've both done really the same sort of thing. "If thou be the Son of God, cast thyself down from the pinnacle of the temple." This is suicidal thought now. Don't know if any of you have had crazy thoughts about doing crazy things, and some people do. And Jesus did. He thought, well, I could literally chuck myself off the temple. And I know because I'm the Son of God, he's going to save me. And there's the chimp again, coming in and, trying to get him to react in a way he doesn't want to. Once again, he checks with the computer. Once again, he boxes the chimp right down. The thought itself wasn't sin. If you'd done it, it would have been. And finally, now this is probably more human, I could, says Jesus in his mind, take over all the world right now, establish the kingdom, forget God's will, I could do it now. There's the chimp. Possibly that's a proud human thinking that, but either way, it checks with the computer, it's boxed down. Jesus won the battle, you see, over the chimp. Never once. How remarkable is this? Never once did the chimp get the better of him. Not once. How unbelievable. Well, it isn't unbelievable. It is believable because he did it. And when he died, therefore, he had conquered this, and all of this was working in perfect harmony. The chimp had not won the day, and neither had the proud human won the day either. And through death, Jesus destroyed him that had the power of death. That is the devil. You see, this is the power of death here. It's these lusts and temptations that are coming out and forcing us or making us do things sometimes that we don't want to do. But we can also share in the victory of Jesus because we've all got a chimp. And if we also accept the sacrifice of a perfect man, the Lord Jesus Christ, and are baptized, then we too can have all of it put right. And even though our chimp can be out of control now, and our human can be proud, fundamentally, if we are baptized, we can be forgiven from our sin through the one man, the only man who actually overcame both the proud human and an out of control chimp. Know you not that so many of us as were baptized into his, Jesus Christ, were baptized into his death, but if we've been planted together in the likeness of his death, we shall be also in the likeness of his resurrection. So, actually, there is a race that we're running. We've all got chimps, we've all got humans in our brains, and there is a battle going on. But actually, this is a race that we can only win if we accept the Lord Jesus Christ in our lives. Because only by clothing ourselves through baptism in a perfect manner are we ever going to succeed. If you want to fight the battle of a chimp and a proud human, you're going to lose. Because every single person that's ever lived has lost the battle against the chimp and lost the battle against being proud. Only one man has overcome that. The wonderful thing is, the race that Chris Hoy won, and he got those nice gold medals, is nothing compared to what we're going to win if we accept these things as truth. Because don't you realise, says Paul to the Corinthians, that in a race everyone runs, but only one person gets the prize. So run to win. If this man can dedicate his life to controlling his chimp to win that bit of stuff round his neck, surely we should dedicate our lives to controlling our chimps and our humans and get them to work right. All athletes are disciplined in their training, says Paul. They do it to win a prize that will fade away, but we do it for an eternal prize. So I run with purpose in every step. I'm not just shadow boxing. I discipline my body like an athlete, training it to do what it should, and fundamentally, that's controlling your mind. It is all in the mind, and the Bible got it right from the very beginning, and only in recent years have we fully perhaps appreciated what actually is in this book.